What if the greatest threat to civilization isn't evil people doing evil things, but ordinary people who have simply stopped thinking? We tend to believe that intelligence is our shield against error, that a person with multiple degrees or a high IQ is immune to dangerous ideas. But history, and modern science, suggests otherwise. What if stupidity isn't the absence of intelligence, but something far more insidious, an active surrender of the mind? This isn't an abstract philosophical question. It's a terrifying reality we see every day. A brilliant scientist with a Nobel Prize sharing misinformation. A respected teacher endorsing harmful ideologies. A loving parent making decisions that endanger their own children. These aren't evil people. They are intelligent, well-meaning individuals who have fallen victim to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German pastor and theologian, called the power of functional stupidity. It's a kind of willful ignorance that transforms intelligent minds into instruments of destruction. Bonhoeffer saw this firsthand in Nazi Germany, and his observations led him to develop one of the most unsettling theories about human nature ever conceived. Before we dive deeper, ask yourself, have you ever found yourself believing something simply because everyone around you believed it, too? This question is the key to understanding a force that threatens us all. The unsettling theory of stupidity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not an armchair philosopher. Born in 1906, he was a German Lutheran pastor from a prominent intellectual family. He believed in the power of education and rational discourse. But as the Nazi Party rose to power, he watched in horror as his fellow Germans, educated, cultured, and religious people, supported policies and leaders that contradicted everything they claimed to believe. He realized that these were not ignorant masses being manipulated. They were professors, doctors, and clergy who were actively participating in their own intellectual surrender. From his prison cell in 1943, waiting to be executed for his role in a plot to assassinate Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote a letter that contained his most haunting observation: against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. What made this insight so chilling was its precision. Bonhoeffer noted that evil always carries within itself the seeds of its own subversion. It creates unease and resistance. But stupidity is different. A stupid person, he wrote, believes they are doing good, which makes them impervious to correction. This isn't low intelligence, it's a social and psychological phenomenon. Bonhoeffer wrote, the fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he is not independent. In conversation with him, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like that have taken possession of him. The twofold cause: systemic pressure and cognitive vulnerabilities. Bonhoeffer's theory was revolutionary because he argued that stupidity isn't an individual failing but a systemic problem. It emerges from pressures that make independent thinking difficult and costly. Our modern world has created the perfect conditions for this surrender to flourish. First, our systems actively incentivize intellectual shortcuts. Social media algorithms make billions when users react emotionally rather than think critically. News outlets get more clicks with outrage than with nuance. Politicians win elections with simple slogans rather than complex policy proposals. When people are overwhelmed by information, economic stress, and endless demands, intellectual surrender becomes a survival strategy. It becomes more efficient for individuals to remain uninformed, a concept economists call rational ignorance, than to invest the time and energy required for genuine understanding. This individual rationality, however, creates collective irrationality. Second, our brains are hardwired to comply. While Bonhoeffer witnessed this in the 1940s, modern psychology has confirmed his insights. Research by Leon Festinger on cognitive dissonance in the 1950s showed that when people encounter information that contradicts their beliefs, their brains fight to reject it. Bonhoeffer understood that this process is amplified when people are stressed, overwhelmed, or economically insecure, precisely the conditions our current systems create. Stupidity, he observed, is a sociological problem. He noticed that perfectly rational individuals would abandon their critical thinking abilities when they became part of a larger group or movement. This insight was decades ahead of its time. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments showed that when surrounded by a group giving obviously wrong answers, 75% of people will go along with the crowd at least once, even when they know the group is wrong. Now, imagine this phenomenon amplified by our digital age. Social media algorithms create echo chambers where false information spreads 6 times faster than true information, not because it's more accurate, but because it's often more emotionally satisfying and confirms a user's worldview. The fight for intellectual independence. If our systems and our brains are rigged against us, how do we fight back? Bonhoeffer believed that breaking free from stupidity requires what he called costly grace, the willingness to think independently even when it is painful, unpopular, or dangerous. This requires individual and structural change. On a personal level, we must cultivate intellectual humility, the recognition that our knowledge is always incomplete and potentially wrong. Here are some concrete practices to help you resist intellectual surrender. Practice intellectual friction. Actively seek out and read thoughtful arguments from people with whom you disagree. Do this not to change your mind, but to test whether your convictions can withstand scrutiny. Embrace productive ignorance. When you find yourself absolutely certain about something, ask yourself, what evidence would change my mind? If you can't think of any, that's a serious red flag. Slow down your sharing. Before posting anything online, take a moment to verify it from an independent source. That brief pause can break the cycle that feeds on our emotional reactions. Practice saying, I don't know. In a world that rewards confident ignorance over humble uncertainty, admitting gaps in your knowledge is a radical act. However, individual practices alone aren't enough. We also need structural changes that make intellectual honesty easier and more rewarding. This includes requiring social media platforms to disclose their algorithmic biases, funding comprehensive media literacy campaigns, and implementing economic policies that reduce the stress and uncertainty that make people vulnerable to intellectual shortcuts. The ultimate price of intellectual freedom. Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for his refusal to surrender his intellectual independence. He was executed by hanging on April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. His sacrifice wasn't just about political resistance, it was about defending the very possibility of human thought. He understood that when people stop thinking independently, they stop being fully human. They become, in his words, puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. Bonhoeffer's final challenge to us is this: who stands fast? The answer isn't found in superior intelligence or education. It's found in the daily choice to remain curious rather than certain, to seek truth rather than comfort, and to think carefully rather than react quickly. These are not heroic acts, they are ordinary practices that become extraordinary when everyone around you has stopped doing them. In a world that profits from our intellectual surrender, choosing to think for ourselves is a radical act. The most uncomfortable truth is that we are all susceptible to functional stupidity. The moment we think we're immune, we've already begun to succumb. The price of intellectual freedom is eternal vigilance. Not against external enemies, but against our own tendency to stop thinking when it becomes difficult. Bonhoeffer's warning in the age of artificial intelligence. Bonhoeffer's warning has never been more relevant than it is today. In an age dominated not just by human manipulation, but by the cold efficiency of artificial intelligence, we find ourselves surrounded by systems that don't merely mislead us, they understand us, often better than we understand ourselves. These systems are designed with one goal: to exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who famously resisted the Nazi regime, wrote about the danger not of malice, but of stupidity, what he called the more dangerous enemy of the good. He wasn't referring to low IQ or a lack of education. He was referring to a kind of willful blindness, a refusal to think deeply, a preference for slogans over substance, and comfort over truth. He observed how good people, under certain conditions, become instruments of destruction simply because they no longer engage in the labor of thought. They don't ask questions. They conform. They obey. And perhaps worst of all, they believe what they're told because it's easier than facing the chaos of unfiltered truth. Now fast forward to today. We no longer face only propaganda crafted by regimes or ideologues. We face personalized reality tunnels crafted by algorithms, AI engines that curate our news, shape our feeds, and predict our behaviors with terrifying accuracy. These systems analyze your search history, track your gaze, map your desires, and predict what you'll click on next. They're not evil in themselves. But they don't need to be. They are efficient. And their efficiency is indifferent to truth, wisdom, or well-being. Their job is not to elevate your thinking. Their job is to keep you engaged. And the easiest way to do that is to reinforce your existing biases, feed your outrage, and seduce your attention. We are not just fighting manipulation by human actors, we are now being studied, mapped, and influenced by superhuman machines. These machines don't just tell you what you want to hear, they tell you what you didn't know you wanted to hear. And that's where the danger lies. Bonhoeffer's insight echoes like a warning siren. Stupidity is not just the absence of intelligence, it is the surrender of the will to think. And in this digital age, the temptation to surrender is stronger than ever. Thinking is hard. Thinking is inconvenient. It interrupts our routines, challenges our identities, and threatens our social circles. To truly think is to risk being wrong. It is to risk discomfort. It is to ask, what if I'm not seeing clearly? What if I'm wrong about the people I hate or the ideas I mock? What if the truth is more complex than I'm comfortable with? Most people avoid these questions not because they are dumb, but because they are tired. Overstimulated. Distracted. Addicted to convenience. Our culture rewards speed over reflection, noise over silence, reaction over contemplation. Everything is designed to make you scroll, not to stop. To consume, not to question. To feel, not to think. But Bonhoeffer's deeper point was this: evil can be resisted. But stupidity, that deep, systemic refusal to engage, cannot be argued with. It cannot be educated away. It must be outgrown, overthrown, and dismantled from within by the very people it possesses. And that process begins with a choice. A quiet, private, lonely choice. The choice to think anyway. To slow down when everything is speeding up. To pause before reacting. To read something that challenges you. To sit with discomfort. To ask inconvenient questions. To notice your own mind being manipulated, and to reclaim it. This is the new battlefield. Not just geopolitics. Not just ideology. But cognition itself. Attention itself. The war is no longer out there. It's in here, in the secret theater of your mind, where you still have the power to say no. To unplug. To wonder. To rethink. What Bonhoeffer gives us is not just a critique. It's a call. A spiritual, intellectual, and moral challenge. Will you keep thinking when thinking becomes uncomfortable? Will you keep questioning when the world rewards conformity? Will you preserve your soul in a culture that thrives on mental surrender? The algorithms are not going away. The distractions are not going away. The engineered dopamine hits, the tribal narratives, the seductive half-truths, they are not going away. But neither is your power to choose how you respond. You still have agency. You still have the ability to slow your breath, turn off the feed, and re-enter the deeper waters of your own mind. You still have the courage to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've missed something. Maybe I've been manipulated. And I want to see clearly again. That choice, that posture of mental courage, is the antidote to Bonhoeffer's warning. And it begins not with some grand rebellion, but with a simple question. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Not because you have to, but because you can. Because questioning is a sign of strength, not weakness. Because doubt is not the enemy of truth, it is the beginning of truth. Because certainty without reflection is just another form of blindness. Question your politics. Question your heroes. Question your enemies. Question your fears. Question the narrative you repeat to yourself in the quiet moments. You don't have to abandon your beliefs. But if you never test them, if you never wrestle with them, then they don't belong to you. They belong to someone else, someone who taught you what to think but never taught you how to think. Bonhoeffer's words are not meant to shame, they are meant to awaken. To pierce the fog. To remind us that history's darkest moments were made possible not by monsters, but by ordinary people who stopped thinking. Who went along. Who chose comfort over courage. We cannot afford to do that now. Not when machines are watching. Not when lies are scalable. Not when truth is fragile. Not when civilization itself depends on our ability to remain mentally sovereign. So ask yourself again. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Let it hurt. Let it crack something open. Let it remind you that you are still alive, and still free.